The rain hammered against the emergency room windows as Marcus Chen finished his third consecutive 12-hour shift, his scrubs still damp with sweat from the chaos of another overcrowded night in downtown Seattle. At 34, the single father had grown accustomed to the bone-deep exhaustion that came with juggling his nursing career and raising his 7-year-old daughter Lily alone. But tonight felt different. Tonight, exhaustion mixed with something else entirely when the ambulance doors burst open and paramedics wheeled in a young woman whose pale, trembling form would change everything he thought he knew about healing, family, and the lengths people would go to destroy someone they claimed to love. The woman on the gurney couldn't have been older than 25. Her designer clothes soaked through from the rain, her dark hair matting against skin that had taken on an alarming grayish pallor. What struck Marcus most wasn't her obvious wealth or the expensive jewelry that caught the fluorescent lights, but the way her eyes darted frantically around the emergency room as if she expected someone to materialize from the shadows and finish whatever had brought her to this place of desperate need. When Dr. Patricia Heiress called out her name from the intake clipboard, the sound seemed to echo through the bustling emergency department like a whisper of something ominous approaching. Isabella Castellanos, 24 years old, heiress to the Castellanos pharmaceutical fortune, had been found collapsed outside the Four Seasons Hotel by concerned passers-by, who thought she was having some kind of seizure. But Marcus, whose years of nursing had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that doctors sometimes missed in their rush to diagnose, noticed something that made his blood run cold. The tremors in Isabella's hands weren't random or chaotic, like those caused by neurological disorders or drug withdrawal. They followed a pattern, a rhythm that spoke of systematic poisoning, the kind of deliberate, calculated harm that came from someone who understood exactly how the human body could be slowly, methodically destroyed from within while maintaining the appearance of natural illness. As Marcus helped transfer Isabella to the examination bed, her fingers briefly clutched his wrist with surprising strength for someone so obviously weakened by whatever was coursing through her system. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried words that would haunt him for weeks to come, a desperate plea that suggested this wasn't the first time she had found herself fighting for her life against an enemy she couldn't see or prove existed. She begged him not to let them take her home, not to trust anyone who claimed to be family, because the people who were supposed to protect her were the ones slowly killing her with methodical precision that had fooled doctors, specialists, and everyone else who had dismissed her growing weakness as stress, anxiety, or the pampered complaints of a wealthy young woman who had never faced real hardship in her privileged life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had learned about loss and responsibility the hard way, taking on the role of single parent when his ex-wife, Rachel, decided that motherhood and marriage were incompatible with her dreams of becoming a travel photographer. The divorce had been swift and brutal, leaving him with full custody of Lily and a small apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood where the rent consumed nearly half his nursing salary and left little room for the kind of luxuries that other families took for granted. His days began before sunrise with careful preparation of Lily's breakfast and lunch, followed by the delicate choreography of getting a 7-year-old ready for school, while mentally preparing himself for whatever medical emergencies would fill the next 12 hours of his professional life. The elementary school was only 6 blocks from their apartment, but Marcus walked with her every morning anyway, treasuring those few minutes of conversation about her dreams, her fears, and her unwavering belief that her daddy could fix anything that was broken in the world. Evening routines involved homework supervision at their small kitchen table, where Lily would spread out her assignments while Marcus reviewed patient charts and continuing education materials, both of them working quietly in the comfortable silence that had become their normal rhythm. Bath time, story time, and tucking her into the twin bed they had bought secondhand from a thrift store filled the final hours before Marcus allowed himself the luxury of sitting alone in their tiny living room, usually too tired to do anything more than stare at the television without really seeing whatever program was playing. The financial pressures were constant and unforgiving, requiring careful budgeting that left no room for spontaneous purchases or unexpected expenses that could derail their precarious stability. Marcus had become an expert at stretching grocery budgets, finding free entertainment options that would keep Lily happy and engaged, and maintaining their modest lifestyle with the kind of resourcefulness that came from understanding exactly how quickly circumstances could change for the worse. But despite the challenges and the loneliness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him during those quiet evening hours after Lily fell asleep, Marcus had found genuine purpose in his nursing career that went beyond simple financial necessity. There was something profoundly meaningful about being present during people's most vulnerable moments, offering comfort and competent care when illness or injury stripped away all pretense and left only human need and the desire for healing. His colleagues respected his clinical skills and his ability to remain calm during medical emergencies that sent other staff members into panic mode. But what they didn't fully understand was how much his role as Lily's father had taught him about protective instincts and the fierce determination that came from being responsible for someone else's well-being and safety. When Isabella Castellanos arrived in his emergency room that rain-soaked evening, something in her desperate plea triggered every protective instinct that Marcus had developed during 7 years of single parenthood, combined with his professional training that taught him to recognize when patients were trying to communicate something critical that others might dismiss or overlook entirely. The initial examination revealed a constellation of symptoms that should have painted a clear picture for any competent emergency physician. But Dr. Reyes seemed determined to attribute Isabella's condition to panic attacks, dehydration, or the kind of psychosomatic complaints that wealthy patients sometimes developed when their privileged lives failed to provide the meaning and purpose they desperately craved. Marcus watched with growing frustration as blood was drawn for routine panels that he knew would come back within normal ranges, because whoever was poisoning Isabella Castellanos understood exactly how to avoid detection through standard hospital protocols. Isabella's medical history, when it finally arrived via fax from her primary physician's office in the exclusive Bellevue district, read like a textbook case of deliberate medical gaslighting that had been perpetrated over the course of nearly 18 months. Complaints of fatigue, muscle weakness, digestive issues, and cognitive difficulties had been systematically dismissed by a parade of specialists who had prescribed everything from antidepressants to vitamin supplements while completely missing the obvious signs of chronic heavy metal poisoning that Marcus recognized from his toxicology training. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone who understood how certain substances could be administered in small doses over extended periods, creating a gradual decline that mimicked dozens of other conditions while avoiding the acute symptoms that would immediately point toward intentional poisoning. Marcus had seen similar cases during his residency training, usually involving domestic violence situations where abusive partners used their access to household chemicals or prescription medications to maintain control over their victims through carefully orchestrated health crises. What made Isabella's situation particularly insidious was the wealth and social status that should have protected her from such treatment, but instead provided perfect cover for family members who understood that her mysterious illness would be attributed to stress, anxiety, or the supposed fragility that society often projected onto young women who had never been required to work for their survival. The Castellanos family controlled one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on the West Coast, giving them both the knowledge and the resources necessary to orchestrate exactly this kind of systematic health destruction. As Marcus continued his assessment, Isabella's responses to seemingly routine questions revealed the depth of isolation and gaslighting that had been used to undermine her trust in her own perceptions and experiences. When he asked about her living situation, She described returning to the family mansion 6 months earlier after completing her master's degree in environmental science, a decision that had coincided perfectly with the escalation of her health problems and the increasing frequency of medical episodes that left her weak, confused, and dependent on family members who expressed concern while actively working to ensure her continued deterioration. Her father, Ricardo Castellanos, had built his pharmaceutical empire through aggressive business practices that had earned him both tremendous wealth and numerous enemies among competitors who accused him of industrial espionage, patent theft, and the kind of corner-cutting that put profits ahead of public safety. Isabella's decision to pursue environmental science rather than business or medicine had created tension within the family, particularly when her senior thesis focused on the environmental impact of pharmaceutical manufacturing processes and the regulatory failures that allowed companies to pollute communities while facing minimal consequences. The family dynamics became even more complex when Isabella described her stepmother Victoria, who had married Ricardo just 3 years earlier and immediately began positioning herself as the primary influence over family financial decisions and business operations. Victoria's background in chemistry and her previous work for several major pharmaceutical companies had made her invaluable to Ricardo's business operations, but it had also given her the knowledge necessary to create untraceable health problems for anyone who threatened her newly acquired position and influence. Isabella's half-brother Cameron, who was only 16 but already being groomed to take over the family business, had initially welcomed her return home with genuine enthusiasm that had gradually transformed into cold distance as her health problems became more pronounced and her ability to participate in family activities diminished significantly. The change in Cameron's attitude coincided with increasingly frequent private conversations between him and Victoria, discussions that always ended abruptly whenever Isabella entered the room. Marcus recognized the classic pattern of familial abuse that used medical manipulation as a weapon, creating a situation where the victim became increasingly dependent on their abusers while simultaneously being portrayed as unstable, hypochondriacal, or mentally ill to anyone who might otherwise offer support or intervention. The isolation was complete and devastating, leaving Isabella with no one to turn to who would believe her growing suspicions about the true cause of her declining health. The breakthrough in Marcus's understanding came when Isabella mentioned that her symptoms always seemed to worsen after family meals, particularly the elaborate Sunday dinners that Victoria insisted on preparing personally as a way of maintaining family traditions and demonstrating her commitment to their household's harmony and well-being. These meals were presented as loving gestures that brought the family together, but Isabella had begun to notice that her most severe episodes invariably occurred within hours of consuming Victoria's carefully prepared dishes when Marcus asked about her diet and any recent changes to her eating habits. Isabella's response revealed the methodical nature of the poisoning that was being disguised as maternal care and family bonding. Victoria had gradually taken over all meal preparation duties, claiming that Isabella's poor health required special attention to nutrition and dietary supplements that would help restore her strength and vitality. But these same meals and supplements were actually delivering carefully measured doses of substances that would never appear in standard toxicology screenings. The sophistication of the poisoning suggested someone with advanced knowledge of pharmaceutical chemistry and access to substances that weren't readily available to ordinary individuals, pointing directly toward Victoria's professional background and her current access to the Castellanos Company's research facilities and chemical inventory. The timing of the poisoning also coincided perfectly with Ricardo's recent announcement that he was considering early retirement and the need to designate a successor who would maintain the family's control over the pharmaceutical empire he had spent decades building. Isabella's inheritance rights and her potential influence over family business decisions represented a direct threat to Victoria's plans for securing her own position and ensuring that Cameron would inherit control of the company without interference from his older half-sister, whose environmental advocacy and ethical concerns could potentially undermine the aggressive business practices that had generated their massive wealth. The systematic destruction of Isabella's health served multiple purposes, eliminating her as a business threat while also providing justification for excluding her from important family decisions due to her supposed mental and physical instability. As Marcus listened to Isabella's story unfold, he realized that he was witnessing something far more sinister than simple domestic abuse or family conflict over money and inheritance rights. This was a calculated campaign of medical terrorism being perpetrated by people who understood exactly how to exploit the healthcare system's biases and blind spots, while maintaining the appearance of loving concern for their victims' well-being and recovery. The most chilling aspect of Isabella's situation was the way her own father had been manipulated into participating in her systematic destruction, believing that he was supporting his daughter through a difficult period of mental health struggles, while actually enabling the very people who were slowly killing her for their own financial and personal gain. Ricardo's genuine love for his daughter had been weaponized against both of them, creating a situation where his protective instincts were being used to isolate Isabella from potential sources of help or support. Marcus knew that proving intentional poisoning would require more than standard hospital procedures and routine blood tests, but Isabella's desperate plea for protection suggested that time was running out and that her family's patience with the slow progression of her illness might be reaching its limits, potentially leading to more direct and immediately fatal intervention. The discharge process that evening revealed just how thoroughly Isabella's family had infiltrated every aspect of her medical care and personal autonomy. Within 20 minutes of Dr. Reyes completing her cursory examination and declaring Isabella's symptoms consistent with acute anxiety disorder, the emergency room lobby filled with an entourage that commanded immediate attention from hospital staff who rarely showed such deference to ordinary families seeking medical treatment for their loved ones. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria Castellano swept through the automatic doors like royalty, making a grand entrance. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and immaculate designer clothing, creating a sharp contrast to the sterile hospital environment and the genuine concern etched across her carefully made-up features. Her performance was flawless, combining maternal worry with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of managing both corporate boardrooms and domestic situations that required careful manipulation of appearances and perceptions. Behind Victoria came Ricardo Castellanos himself, a man whose presence seemed to bend the entire emergency department toward his will through sheer force of personality and the kind of wealth that made hospital administrators eager to accommodate any request or preference he might express. His silver hair and expensive suit marked him as someone accustomed to having his concerns addressed immediately and thoroughly. But Marcus noticed that his genuine distress over Isabella's condition was being carefully guided and interpreted by Victoria's constant commentary about their daughter's ongoing struggle with mental health issues. The third member of their rescue party was Cameron, Isabella's 16-year-old half-brother, whose athletic build and prep school confidence couldn't quite mask the discomfort that flickered across his features whenever he looked directly at his sister's weakened form on the hospital bed. His interaction with Isabella carried an undercurrent of guilt that suggested he knew more about her condition than he was willing or able to acknowledge, even to himself. Marcus observed the family dynamics with the trained eye of someone who had spent years recognizing the subtle signs of abuse and manipulation that often hid behind facades of love and concern. Victoria's behavior was particularly telling, as she positioned herself as the primary communicator between Isabella and the medical staff, effectively controlling the flow of information in both directions while maintaining the appearance of advocating for her stepdaughter's best interests and immediate comfort. The way Victoria described Isabella's recent medical history to Dr. Reyes was masterful in its blend of truth and misdirection, acknowledging the reality of her symptoms while attributing them to stress, depression, and the kind of hypochondriacal tendencies that wealthy young women sometimes developed when their lives lacked sufficient challenge or purpose. She spoke with the authority of someone who had researched Isabella's condition extensively and consulted with numerous specialists, painting herself as a devoted mother figure who had exhausted every possible avenue for helping her troubled stepdaughter. Ricardo's contributions to these discussions revealed how completely he had been manipulated into believing that Isabella's health problems stemmed from psychological rather than physical causes, despite his obvious love for his daughter and his genuine desire to see her recover her former vitality and happiness. His comments about Isabella's perfectionist tendencies and her disappointment over not immediately finding meaningful work after completing her master's degree showed how Victoria had gradually shaped his understanding of the situation to support her preferred narrative. The discharge paperwork included referrals to a psychiatrist who specialized in treating anxiety disorders and depression in young adults, along with prescriptions for medications that Marcus recognized as potentially dangerous for someone already suffering from heavy metal poisoning, as the drug interactions could accelerate her decline while providing additional cover for the ongoing poisoning campaign. Victoria had clearly orchestrated this entire medical response to serve her purposes while appearing to seek the best possible care for Isabella's well-being. As the family prepared to leave, Marcus noticed how Isabella's energy seemed to drain away the moment her relatives arrived, her earlier desperation giving way to a resigned compliance that spoke of months or years of having her concerns dismissed and her perceptions questioned by the very people who claimed to want her recovery. The transformation was heartbreaking to witness, as the young woman who had begged him not to let them take her home now meekly accepted Victoria's assistance with walking to the wheelchair that would transport her back to the mansion, where her systematic destruction would continue. Marcus's attempt to speak privately with Isabella was smoothly intercepted by Victoria, who explained that her stepdaughter often became confused and paranoid during her episodes, making statements that reflected her internal emotional turmoil, rather than any external reality that medical professionals should take seriously. This explanation was delivered with such conviction and apparent concern that Dr. Reyes nodded sympathetically, clearly viewing Victoria as a long-suffering family member dealing with a difficult mental health situation that required patience and professional intervention. The final moment that convinced Marcus of the family's malicious intent came when Victoria handed Isabella a small bottle of what she described as specially formulated vitamins that had been recommended by their family physician for supporting Isabella's immune system and overall health during this challenging period. Isabella's barely perceptible flinch when she accepted the bottle was so subtle that only someone watching specifically for signs of fear would have noticed it. But Marcus had confirmed everything he had suspected about the true nature of her medical crisis. Ricardo's parting conversation with Dr. Reyes included a substantial donation to the hospital's emergency medicine department, presented as a gesture of gratitude for the excellent care his daughter had received and his family's commitment to supporting the medical professionals who worked tirelessly to help people during their most vulnerable moments. The donation was large enough to ensure that any future visits from Isabella would be viewed through the lens of the family's generosity and their established relationship with the hospital administration. As Marcus watched the wheelchair disappear through the emergency room doors, Isabella's eyes met his one final time with an expression that combined desperation, resignation, and a plea for help that he was powerless to provide within the constraints of hospital protocol and professional boundaries. That look would haunt him for the rest of his shift and throughout the long drive home to his apartment, where Lily was waiting with Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who watched her during his evening shifts. The following morning brought a routine that Marcus had perfected over 7 years of single parenthood, but his usual efficiency was disrupted by persistent thoughts about Isabella's case and the growing certainty that he had witnessed something far more sinister than a family dealing with mental health challenges. Lily's cheerful chatter about her upcoming school project on environmental protection seemed to echo Isabella's own academic interests, creating an uncomfortable parallel that made Marcus wonder how many other young women were suffering in silence, while their families systematically destroyed their credibility in health. Mrs. Chen's observations about Isabella's case, offered during their brief conversation as she prepared to return to her own apartment, carried the wisdom of someone who had lived through decades of observing human nature in all its complexity and cruelty. She had immigrated from Taiwan as a young woman and worked as a laboratory technician for 40 years before retirement, giving her both the cultural perspective and technical knowledge to recognize patterns that others might miss or dismiss as coincidental. Her comment that wealthy families often had the resources to make problems disappear without leaving obvious evidence struck Marcus as particularly relevant to Isabella's situation, where the poisoning was sophisticated enough to avoid detection through standard medical testing while creating symptoms that could easily be attributed to psychological causes. Mrs. Chen's suggestion that some forms of harm required patience and careful observation to detect resonated with Marcus's own growing conviction that Isabella needed an advocate who understood both medical science and the dynamics of familial abuse. The morning news included a brief mention of the Castellanos family's latest charitable contribution to environmental research, a donation that had been announced the same week that Isabella was hospitalized for her mysterious symptoms, creating an ironic contrast between their public image as supporters of environmental protection and their private willingness to poison their own family member for financial gain. Marcus found himself researching the Castellanos pharmaceutical company during his lunch break, discovering a corporate history that included several FDA investigations for questionable manufacturing practices and allegations of covering up adverse effects from medications that had generated hundreds of millions in revenue before being quietly withdrawn from the market. The pattern of prioritizing profits over safety extended back decades, suggesting that Isabella's systematic poisoning was entirely consistent with her family's approach to dealing with obstacles to their financial interests. The unexpected phone call came 3 days later during Marcus's afternoon shift, interrupting his routine medication administration rounds with news that would fundamentally alter his understanding of Isabella's situation and his own capacity for making difficult moral choices. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Amanda Foster, a toxicologist at Seattle Children's Hospital who had received Isabella's blood samples through an unusual chain of events that began with a laboratory technician's curiosity about certain anomalous readings that had been flagged and then mysteriously cleared from the system. Dr. Foster explained that she had been contacted by her former colleague, Dr. James Wright, who worked in the emergency department's laboratory and had noticed irregularities in Isabella's blood work that suggested the presence of compounds not included in standard toxicology panels. Wright had been troubled enough by these findings to run additional tests using his own resources and time, discovering trace amounts of thallium and other heavy metals that could only have resulted from deliberate, ongoing exposure to these dangerous substances over an extended period. The conversation revealed that Wright had been tracking similar cases over the past 2 years, documenting a pattern of wealthy patients presenting with mysterious symptoms that were consistently misdiagnosed as psychological disorders, while showing clear evidence of intentional poisoning when subjected to more comprehensive testing. His unofficial research suggested that financial motivations were driving family members to use their resources and knowledge to systematically eliminate relatives who posed threats to inheritance rights or business interests. Dr. Foster's involvement in the case stemmed from her specialization in pediatric poisoning cases and her growing concern about the intersection between domestic violence and sophisticated chemical knowledge that allowed abusers to torture their victims while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions and methods. Her offer to provide unofficial consultation on Isabella's case came with warnings about the legal and professional risks involved in pursuing allegations against prominent families who had the resources to destroy careers and reputations. The discussion of treatment options for thallium poisoning was sobering, as the metal's effects on the nervous system could be partially reversed if intervention occurred early enough, but the damage already done to Isabella's cognitive function and physical health might be permanent if the exposure continued for much longer. Dr. Foster emphasized that thallium was particularly insidious because it could be administered in tiny amounts through food or drink, creating a gradual decline that mimicked dozens of other conditions while accumulating in tissue and organs until reaching lethal levels. Marcus's request for guidance about how to help Isabella without violating hospital protocols or professional ethics led to a lengthy conversation about the limitations of the medical system when dealing with cases that crossed the boundaries between healthcare and criminal justice. Dr. Foster shared her own frustrations about cases where she had identified clear evidence of intentional poisoning, but lacked the authority to remove victims from dangerous situations or compel law enforcement agencies to take action against perpetrators who understood how to exploit legal loopholes. The practical challenges of documenting and proving intentional poisoning were immense, particularly when the perpetrators had access to pharmaceutical-grade substances and the knowledge necessary to avoid detection through standard medical testing procedures. Dr. Foster explained that successful prosecution of such cases typically required extensive collaboration between medical professionals, law enforcement specialists, and legal experts who understood the complex intersection between medical evidence and criminal intent. Marcus's growing determination to help Isabella, despite these obstacles, led to discussions about alternative approaches that might circumvent the traditional reporting mechanisms that had already failed to protect her from ongoing harm. Dr. Foster suggested that documenting Isabella's condition through independent medical evaluation might provide the evidence necessary to support future legal action while also creating a paper trail that could protect Marcus from accusations of unprofessional conduct or conspiracy. The conversation concluded with Dr. Foster providing contact information for Detective Sarah Rodriguez, a specialist in financial crimes who had been investigating the Castellanos family's business practices for several years and might be interested in adding medical evidence to her existing case file. Rodriguez had been building a pattern of evidence, suggesting that the family used various forms of intimidation and elimination to maintain their market position and control over their pharmaceutical empire. Marcus's decision to contact Detective Rodriguez required careful consideration of the potential consequences for both his career and his daughter's security, as taking action against the Castellanos family would inevitably expose him to retaliation from people who had already demonstrated their willingness to commit murder for financial gain. The conversation with Lily that evening about the importance of helping people in danger took on new significance as Marcus weighed his moral obligations against his responsibility to ensure her safety and stability. Lily's innocent questions about why some people hurt others and whether her daddy could always protect her from bad people forced Marcus to confront the reality that his involvement in Isabella's case might put them both at risk from adversaries who had vast resources and no apparent moral constraints on their methods. Her trust in his ability to keep her safe was both inspiring and terrifying, as it reminded him of the stakes involved in any decision to move forward with challenging the Castellanos family. The evening routine of homework, dinner, and bedtime stories provided a stark contrast to the dangerous world that Isabella inhabited, where family meals were opportunities for poisoning and expressions of love or vehicles for systematic destruction. Marcus found himself treasuring these ordinary moments with Lily, while simultaneously feeling guilty about his ability to provide safety and security that Isabella was being denied by the very people who should have been protecting her. Mrs. Chen's observations about the importance of standing up to bullies, offered during their brief conversation as she returned from watching Lily, carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the consequences of allowing evil to flourish unchallenged. Her stories about life in Taiwan under martial law included examples of ordinary people who had risked everything to help others, creating a moral framework that made Marcus's choice seem less about professional obligation and more about fundamental human decency. The research Marcus conducted that night into thallium poisoning revealed the full scope of Isabella's danger, as the metal's effects on the nervous system would continue to worsen with each additional dose, eventually leading to paralysis, organ failure, and death that could easily be attributed to natural causes or genetic predisposition to neurological disorders. The window for effective treatment was closing rapidly, making any delay in intervention potentially fatal for someone who had already endured months of ongoing exposure. Detective Rodriguez's background, which Marcus discovered through public records and news articles, included extensive experience with white-collar crime cases involving pharmaceutical companies that had used various illegal methods to eliminate competition and silence whistleblowers. Her reputation for thorough investigation and successful prosecution of complex financial crimes suggested that she might be the ideal person to help Isabella, while also addressing the broader pattern of criminal activity that had made her victimization possible. The most disturbing aspect of Marcus's research was the discovery that the Castellanos family had been connected to several other mysterious deaths over the past decade, including business partners who had died suddenly after developing disputes over company direction and former employees who had suffered fatal accidents after threatening to expose illegal practices. The pattern suggested that Isabella's poisoning was part of a larger strategy of using medical manipulation and apparent accidents to eliminate threats to the family's wealth and power. Marcus's growing understanding of the scope of the Castellanos family's criminal enterprise made his decision to help Isabella seem both more urgent and more dangerous, as he was potentially challenging an organization that had successfully eliminated numerous other threats to their operations over many years. The realization that Isabella might not be their first victim, and would certainly not be their last without intervention, added moral weight to his consideration of whether to contact Detective Rodriguez. The practical challenges of maintaining his normal work schedule while secretly investigating a powerful family's criminal activities required careful planning and discretion that Marcus had never needed to develop during his nursing career. His growing involvement in Isabella's case was creating risks and responsibilities that extended far beyond his professional training and experience, forcing him to consider whether ordinary people had any realistic chance of challenging wealthy criminals who operated with apparent impunity. The evening concluded with Marcus making the preliminary decision to contact Detective Rodriguez the following day, understanding that this choice would likely set in motion a series of events that could either save Isabella's life or destroy his own ability to provide for Lily's needs and security. The weight of this responsibility was overwhelming, but the alternative of allowing Isabella to die while he maintained his comfortable distance from danger seemed morally unacceptable. Detective Rodriguez's office occupied a cramped corner of the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, its walls covered with interconnected charts and photographs that mapped the complex web of corruption surrounding the Castellanos pharmaceutical empire. When Marcus arrived for their meeting, carrying copies of Isabella's blood work and Dr. Foster's analysis, he discovered that Isabella's case represented the missing piece of a puzzle that Rodriguez had been assembling for nearly 3 years. The detective's investigation had begun with seemingly unrelated complaints about price fixing and patent theft, but had gradually revealed a pattern of systematic elimination that extended far beyond normal corporate espionage or competitive practices. Rodriguez explained that the Castellanos family had been using their pharmaceutical knowledge and resources to silence whistleblowers, eliminate business rivals, and maintain control over lucrative drug patents through methods that consistently avoided detection by law enforcement agencies focused on traditional forms of corporate crime. The evidence Rodriguez had accumulated included financial records showing suspicious payments to offshore accounts, communication intercepts revealing discussions about handling problems through medical means, and testimony from former employees who had witnessed Victoria Castellanos conducting unauthorized experiments with dangerous compounds in the company's private research facilities. The challenge had been connecting these activities to specific crimes that could be prosecuted successfully, as the victims had either died of apparently natural causes or been discredited as mentally unstable, individuals whose claims couldn't be substantiated. Marcus's documentation of Isabella's poisoning provided the first direct evidence of the family's methods and their willingness to target even their own relatives when financial interests were at stake. The sophistication of the thallium poisoning, combined with the systematic gaslighting that had prevented Isabella from receiving appropriate medical care, demonstrated a level of premeditation and cruelty that satisfied the legal requirements for charges of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Rodriguez's plan for gathering additional evidence required Marcus to maintain contact with Isabella while secretly documenting her condition and the family's behavior through carefully concealed recording devices and photography that would capture the progression of her symptoms and the family's responses to her deteriorating health. The detective emphasized that this approach carried significant risks, as the Castellanos family had already demonstrated their willingness to eliminate threats through violence when subtler methods proved insufficient. The coordination between Rodriguez's investigation and Dr. Foster's medical expertise created a comprehensive approach to building a case that would not only save Isabella's life but also expose the full scope of the family's criminal activities and prevent future victims from suffering similar fates. Dr. Foster had agreed to provide expert testimony about the medical evidence while also coordinating with toxicology specialists who could testify about the sophisticated nature of them poisoning and the level of knowledge required to carry out such an attack. Marcus's role in the operation required him to establish a legitimate medical relationship with Isabella through the hospital's home healthcare program, creating opportunities for regular contact that would allow him to monitor her condition while documenting evidence of ongoing poisoning. The challenge was convincing Victoria Castellanos to accept this arrangement without arousing suspicion about his true motivations or his connection to the broader investigation into their criminal activities. The initial approach came through Dr. Reyes, who contacted the Castellanos family to suggest that Isabella's ongoing health problems might benefit from specialized nursing care that could provide more intensive monitoring and support than traditional outpatient visits. Marcus's reputation for excellence in complex medical cases made him the obvious choice for this assignment, and his genuine concern for Isabella's well-being helped sell the legitimacy of the arrangement to a family that was accustomed to purchasing whatever medical services they deemed necessary. Victoria's enthusiastic acceptance of the home nursing arrangement revealed her confidence that Isabella's condition was too advanced to be reversed through medical intervention, and her belief that having a medical professional document Isabella's decline would actually support their narrative about her mental health struggles and genetic predisposition to neurological disorders. The stepmother's willingness to allow external oversight of Isabella's care demonstrated either supreme arrogance or complete confidence that their methods were undetectable through normal medical observation. Marcus's first official visit to the Castellanos mansion confirmed every suspicion he had developed about the family's wealth, power, and complete lack of moral constraints on their behavior. The estate occupied several acres in the exclusive Medina neighborhood. Its elaborate security systems and staff of domestic workers creating an environment where Isabella was completely isolated from potential sources of help or support outside the family circle. The mansion's interior combined ostentatious displays of wealth with subtle signs of the pharmaceutical research that was being conducted in violation of numerous safety regulations and legal restrictions. Marcus noticed laboratory equipment in what should have been a standard home office, along with chemical storage facilities that were clearly designed for compounds, far more dangerous than anything that belonged in a residential setting. Isabella's condition had deteriorated significantly since her emergency room visit, with new symptoms including partial paralysis in her left hand, severe cognitive confusion, and episodes of temporary blindness that Victoria attributed to psychological stress and attention-seeking behavior designed to manipulate family members into providing excessive sympathy and support. The progression of her symptoms was entirely consistent with advanced thallium poisoning, but was being documented by family physicians as evidence of conversion disorder and hysteria. The family's treatment of Isabella during Marcus's visits revealed the full scope of their psychological manipulation and medical abuse, as they consistently contradicted her statements about her symptoms while portraying themselves as patient, loving relatives dealing with a difficult and demanding patient who refused to accept responsibility for her own recovery. Victoria's performance was particularly sophisticated, combining apparent medical knowledge with maternal concern to create a narrative that made Isabella appear unreasonable and unreliable. Cameron's behavior during these visits provided additional evidence of the family's criminal activities, as his discomfort around his sister had escalated into barely concealed hostility that suggested he understood exactly what was happening to her and had been coached to view her elimination as necessary for protecting the family's financial interests. His comments about Isabella's selfishness and her failure to appreciate everything the family had done for her revealed the depth of psychological manipulation that had been used to justify her systematic destruction. The breakthrough in gathering evidence came when Marcus secretly recorded a conversation between Victoria and Ricardo, discussing the timeline for Isabella's expected death and their plans for handling the legal and financial complications that would follow her demise. The recording captured Victoria's clinical discussion of Isabella's declining neurological function and her prediction that complete organ failure would occur within 6 to 8 weeks. Allowing them to proceed with business decisions that required Isabella's permanent removal from consideration. Ricardo's participation in these discussions revealed how completely he had been manipulated into accepting his daughter's murder as a medical necessity, believing that her death would actually be a mercy that would end her suffering while protecting the family from the embarrassment and financial complications of her continued mental health struggles. His genuine grief over her condition was being exploited to secure his cooperation in a plan that would eliminate his own child for the benefit of people who had successfully convinced him that they shared his love and concern for Isabella's well-being. The evidence-gathering phase of the operation required Marcus to witness Isabella's systematic torture while maintaining his cover as a neutral medical professional, creating psychological pressure that tested his ability to continue the investigation without intervening prematurely and potentially destroying their chance to build a comprehensive case against the entire family. Dr. Foster's support during this period was crucial, as she provided both medical guidance for supporting Isabella's condition and emotional support for dealing with the stress of watching someone suffer while being unable to provide immediate relief. The final phase of the investigation began when Detective Rodriguez determined that they had sufficient evidence to seek arrest warrants for Victoria, Ricardo, and Cameron Castellanos on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and illegal possession of controlled substances. The coordination with federal authorities was necessary because the case involved interstate commerce violations and drug trafficking that fell under federal jurisdiction, requiring careful timing to ensure that all family members were arrested simultaneously before they could destroy evidence or flee the country. Marcus's role in the arrest operation required him to maintain his normal nursing schedule while secretly coordinating with law enforcement officers who would be positioned around the mansion to prevent any attempt by family members to escape or harm Isabella during the confrontation. The timing was critical, as Isabella's condition had reached the point where any delay in treatment could result in permanent neurological damage or death, even if the poisoning was immediately discontinued. The morning of the arrests began with Marcus arriving for his regular nursing visit, but this time carrying antidotes and emergency medical equipment that would allow him to begin immediate treatment for Isabella's thallium poisoning as soon as the family members were safely in custody. Dr. Foster was standing by at the hospital with a specialized treatment protocol that could potentially reverse much of the damage that had been done to Isabella's nervous system if intervention occurred quickly enough. Victoria's reaction to the arrival of federal agents revealed the true extent of her coldness and calculation, as she showed no remorse for her actions and instead immediately began attempting to manipulate the situation by claiming that Isabella had been poisoning herself as part of an elaborate suicide attempt designed to frame the family for crimes they had never committed. Her performance was convincing enough to create initial confusion among some of the arresting officers, demonstrating the same skills that had allowed her to fool medical professionals for months. Ricardo's response to learning the truth about Isabella's condition was devastating to witness, as the realization that he had been manipulated into participating in his own daughter's murder broke through years of careful psychological conditioning and revealed the depth of his genuine love for Isabella, alongside his complete betrayal of that love through his willing cooperation with her killers. His collapse was both physical and emotional, requiring medical attention as the full scope of his manipulation became clear. Cameron's arrest was complicated by his status as a minor and his obvious psychological damage from years of exposure to the family's criminal activities and moral corruption. But his recorded statements about Isabella's selfishness and his acceptance of her expected death provided crucial evidence about the systematic way he had been trained to view murder as an acceptable business practice. His future would require extensive psychological intervention to address the damage that had been done to his moral development and understanding of human relationships. The immediate medical treatment that Marcus was able to provide to Isabella potentially saved her life, but the full extent of the neurological damage wouldn't be known for weeks or months as her body slowly eliminated the accumulated heavy metals and her nervous system attempted to repair itself. Dr. Foster's specialized treatment protocol offered hope for significant recovery, but also acknowledged that some of the damage might be permanent, leaving Isabella to deal with lifelong consequences of her family's betrayal and attempted murder. The media coverage of the arrests created a sensation that extended far beyond the local Seattle area, as the case represented one of the most sophisticated and coldly calculated examples of domestic violence and financial murder that law enforcement agencies had ever documented. The pharmaceutical industry faced renewed scrutiny about security protocols and employee background checks, while mental health advocates used the case to highlight the dangerous intersection between medical gaslighting and domestic abuse. Isabella's recovery became a symbol of survival and resilience that inspired other victims of sophisticated abuse to come forward with their own stories, leading to additional investigations and prosecutions that revealed a broader pattern of wealthy families using their resources and knowledge to eliminate inconvenient relatives through methods that exploited the medical system's biases and limitations. Marcus's role in exposing the conspiracy earned him recognition from law enforcement agencies and medical organizations, but also required ongoing security measures to protect both him and Lily from potential retaliation by associates of the Castellanos family or other criminals who viewed his actions as a threat to their own operations. The transformation of his life from routine nursing care to criminal investigation had permanent consequences that extended far beyond the immediate case. The long-term implications of the case included reforms to hospital protocols for detecting and reporting suspected poisoning cases, enhanced training for medical professionals about the signs of systematic abuse, and new legislation requiring more comprehensive background checks for individuals working in pharmaceutical research and manufacturing. Isabella's suffering had exposed vulnerabilities in the system that protected other potential victims from similar fates. As Isabella began her long journey toward physical and emotional recovery, supported by Marcus's continued medical care and Dr. Foster's specialized treatment, the foundation was laid for a different kind of family relationship based on genuine care and protection rather than manipulation and exploitation. The contrast between the Castellanos' family's wealth and moral bankruptcy and the genuine love Marcus provided for both Isabella and Lily demonstrated that true security came from relationships built on trust and mutual support rather than money and power. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.